So good morning. Today I'll be presenting navigating the automotive sector turbulence. So bear with me for about 20 minutes and I will take you through what we expect for the next 1.5 years. Next. So the car. The car is dear to most of us, whether we love it, some of us love to hate it, or to most of us, just a necessity. Hence, affordability or lack thereof is a hot topic among consumers and manufacturers, and a sensitive one to the government. The auto sector is also a major employer and key driver of the economy. To kickstart the economy after the lockdowns in 2020, the auto sector was a key beneficiary of the government's Penjana efforts. Extended 3 times since 2 years ago, the SST exemption is currently scheduled to end in another 2 weeks. While we think there is a good chance it may be extended, my presentation today is based on the SST being re-implemented next month. While demand has been encouraging, the auto sector was facing many challenges in the past 2 years, emanating locally and globally. As such, many popular marques are still struggling to deliver on their orders. So as we leave behind the pandemic, let's take a look at what is ahead for the sector's road to recovery. Next. Let's first look at a monthly chart of the total industry volume, or the TIV, since 2019 until April 2022. In the years before the pandemic, the annual TIV settled at about 600,000 units, or an average of about 50,000 units per month. During the pandemic, in the months of lower restrictions, demand has been strong at above 50,000 units, supported by the SST exemptions and pent-up demand. Nonetheless, 2021 and first half 2022 TIV has also been reined in by supply disruptions. Many of the auto parts manufacturers, especially the smaller ones, faced issues in ramping up production after the MCO 3.0 last year. The December floods also severely affected some suppliers, while a global jam in logistics and shortage of semicon chips are key factors too. Currently, many face labor issues and continued shortfall from the supply chain. As such, many OEM players are trying to secure alternative sources where possible, and also stocking up critical parts. Combined with the strong demand, many bookings will not be fulfilled by end of this month. Given all this, how steep are we expecting the drop-off in demand after the expiry of the SST exemptions? Next, please. Let's look at the market share performance of the top 6 players in 2021 and the top 3 up to April 2022. Since 2021, market share had fluctuated significantly for Perodua and Proton. Playing a significant factor was supply issues emanating not just locally, but from principals as well. Especially this year, there are severe global shortage of semicon chips and delays in raw materials and parts due to lockdowns in China. In fact, the supply problems had also delayed launches of certain models, which played its part in shifting fortunes for the market players. Nonetheless, when supply was sufficient, new and relatively new models such as SUVs from Perodua, Proton, and Toyota helped in boosting market share. Given the strong demand and supply constraints, many brands are currently sitting on long waiting lists, stretching up to 6 months. Hence, some of the strong bookings are expected to spill past June, although a portion of orders are expected to drop off. The second half TIV will also be supported by launches of new popular models such as the replacements for Alza, NHRV, and possibly Vios as well, and a number of less popular models too. Next. This monthly chart includes our expectations for the remaining months of this year. Prior to any announcement, we have to assume the SST will kick in come July. Additionally, future changes to taxes like the new MITI excise tax calculation and GST is not expected soon. Come third quarter, we do expect a significant fall in sales, but more of a knee-jerk effect and shortage of inventory. Sales are still expected to be supported by bookings made in first half, with new orders picking up towards the year-end promotions. We view the drop in demand to be naturally more severe for cars priced below 100,000. While the more premium segment is less affected, this segment still enjoys tax-free options in EVs, although many models are also limited in supply. The combined re-implementation of SSD plus a gradual increase in car prices of up to even 10% is seen to be a significant pain point to drop bookings. A combined substantial increase in car prices will also reduce financing options for lower-end and financially tight consumers. Car prices have been and are expected to continue rising. This is largely unavoidable due to higher cost of raw materials, parts, and logistics, compounded by the weak ringgit. Manufacturers in the sector are very sensitive to forex fluctuations due to their imported content. Consumers' demand for cars will also be dampened by higher inflation, concerns on the economy, potentially tighter financing, and higher cost of car ownership from rising interest rates and fuel subsidy rationalization. All things considered, we believe a TIV of 600,000 units in 2022 is plausible. This figure assumes a significant drop in second half, making up only an estimated 40% of the full year TIV. However, this figure is dependent on the availability of critical parts as well as foreign workers. Of late, there are increasing news on extension of the SSD exemption, which may continue in current form or at reducing rates such as 50%, 25%, and 0%. If the SSD exemptions are extended, we estimate the TIV this year could further rise to about 630 units. Upside also to the TIV if new MITI excise duty calculation is not deferred. Slated to be effective from 1st Jan 2023, MAA estimates that car prices may rise by 8% to 20%. Meanwhile, the pandemic also benefited the second-hand car market as many commuters avoided public transportation. The long waiting list for new cars have also benefited the secondary and reconditioned car markets for consumers that are unwilling to wait. The higher price of new cars are also seen as a boon for the secondary market. Next. With a stronger performing 2022, what can we expect for 2023's TIV? Let's examine over the next few slides. The auto sector is faced with many uncertainties. Unfortunately, quite a lot are negative. On the regulatory front, even if the SSD exemption is extended, we currently do not see it stretching into 2023. Furthermore, there is the added unknown from MITI's new excise tax calculation and possible re-implementation of GST, which may also have its own zero rating period. Nonetheless, we do view that the government is unlikely to introduce a combined tax impact over a short period that has the effect of significantly raising car prices and eroding demand, thus negating the positive support to the sector gained from the 2 years of SSD exemptions. Some of the headwinds from 2022 are likely to continue into 2023, such as the rising car prices, potentially tighter financing, higher cost of living, concerns on economic growth, weak ringgit, and higher car ownership costs. The sharp rise in cost of necessities will erode consumers' budget for discretionary spending, which could mean delaying buying a new car or buying used instead. The front-loading of purchases during the tax-free period will also continue to weigh on the sector next year. Furthermore, supply issues, especially chip shortage, may drag on into 2023, although we are seeing some improvement in Europe. Next. Historically, the TIV and GDP are correlated. Since the substantial decline in 2020, the GDP has been steadily recovering. registering a growth of 3.1% and forecast to grow at 5.8% this year. We expect the economic recovery will largely continue into 2023, slightly moderating towards normal trend growth of around 5%. This level of GDP growth is seen to be supportive to the auto sector. Meanwhile, the household debt to GDP ratio remains high at above 80%. This ratio spiked in 2020 mainly because of the weaker GDP and partly from widespread debt moratorium. The high household debt suggests an increasingly challenging access to financing for certain segments of consumers. Next. Starting this year, the Malaysian government has introduced tax incentives to encourage the adoption of EVs among consumers and manufacturers. While we are slower than some of our ASEAN neighbors, we have at least started the ball rolling just as global EV sales are accelerating. The combined sales of BEVs and PHEVs globally increased by 120% in 2021 over 2020, partly due to the widespread lockdowns in 2020, but also as adoption and awareness gains ground. Substantial growth in sales was seen in key markets, especially in China and the US, where sales more than doubled. Sales of BEVs and PHEVs are reportedly accounting for close to 9% of total vehicle sales worldwide in 2021, up from just 4% the year before. In this region, the key EV markets are Singapore and Thailand. On the local front, we are seeing introduction of new EV models such as from Hyundai, Volvo, Kia, Mazda, and BMW, with many more planned, especially EVs from China. The local sales of EVs are still relatively small, especially as available units are limited. If supplies can be addressed in 2023, the sales of EVs can be meaningful, supported by eager early adopters and the tax-free benefits still enjoyed by the segment. Meanwhile, on the sustainability front, we often forget that the secondary market plays an important role. Due to the carbon footprint of manufacturing a new car, be it ICE or EV, purchasing a relatively new used car is actually more sustainable. Mr. Derek Ng of My2Car is passionate on this subject matter, and perhaps he can share more in the panel session later. Next. Coming back to the big question for 2023, the TIV is seen to be supported by the recovering GDP, and the TIV was subdued during the pandemic despite positive support from the SST exemption. Nonetheless, we view 2023 TIV will likely be dampened by the rising cost of car ownership and cost of living, as well as underlying uncertainties in economic growth. At this point, we see 2023 TIV could be weaker by up to 5% year-on-year. Of course, these views are preliminary and many factors are still unknown and developing. Next. Finally, what does it all mean to the performance of the sector and our rated credits? The chart shows the performance of APM and Burmas against the sector average and our previous rated credits of UMW and Tan Chong. Meanwhile, Proton, another of our rated credit, is not on the chart as it is not Bursa listed. In the last 2 years, the sector's top and bottom line performance had generally been dictated by the severity of lockdown. But it can also be noted that companies with large manufacturing assets and operations was more severely affected due to hefty fixed costs and depreciation. Companies like Burma's, that is not directly involved in the assembly of its cars, fared better during the lockdowns with a lower cost base. Since the last major lockdown in third quarter 2021, the sector and our rated corporates are on an overall recovery trend. Burma's performance was supported by not just a recovery in unit sales, but also supported by strong demand under its new distributorships for Kia and Peugeot. APM was also on a recovery trend since third quarter 2021, but sales was affected in the latest quarter due to customers' operational disruptions from the major December floods. Its earnings was also thinned by rising costs from raw materials and logistics. Meanwhile, Proton had been on demand, but was significantly affected in first quarter 2022 from supply disruptions due to the floods and parts shortage. Looking ahead, we do not expect significant pressures on our rated credits. APM can pass some of the higher costs to its consumers, as has been done in the past, while Proton is still on a growth trend supported by its strong bookings. This brings me to the end of my presentation. Please don't miss out on the opportunity to explore these factors with our panelists, representing key sections of the sector. Thank you.
Thanks for the introduction, Sakina. Very good morning to our distinguished panelists and everyone joining the webinar today. This webinar is the first sector-specific event this year under RAM's Insight series. And today's focus will be on the automotive sector, and we have brought together a diverse group of industry captains across the value chain so that we can give the audience a wholesome picture of the latest developments, challenges, and the outlook for the sector. Dato' Francis, Mr. Lau, and Derek, welcome to the webinar. For this session, I have prepared some topics for discussion, which also incorporates some questions that have been submitted by the audience earlier during registration. For those who have not submitted questions, you can still do so in the Q&A box, and I will be looking out for them during the panel session. 2022 was supposed to be a strong year of recovery for the automotive sector. However, despite the country moving from the pandemic to the endemic phase and supported by the strong demand stimulated by the ongoing sales tax exemption, automakers across the board have been struggling to keep up with demand, with many bookings still undelivered before the June 30th expiry of the incentives. Against this backdrop, let's kick off the discussions with Dato' Francis. Dato', I would like to first congratulate you on a very good set of results for Bermasa's fourth quarter and fiscal year April 2022, despite a very challenging supply chain situation.
Yes.
I think the biggest question or a very common question that we've got in the getting into this webinar is that there's been a lot of news over the weekend that the sales tax exemption may be extended yet again. In your view, is there a high likelihood of this happening, and what are the key considerations driving this decision by the government?
Well, I believe that the government is seriously considering extending this SST exemption. I think there's a hard lobbying by MA to extend because the auto industry is still not has not come out of the woods yet, so to speak, because of the logistic issues and chip shortages, like what Benning mentioned earlier on. So I think most likely it will be extended to until end of June, end of this December 2022. But going forward, there's still a lot of challenges, as I mentioned, and also your Benning mentioned as well about the chip shortages and the logistic issues. Actually, it was exacerbated by the issues that China had a lockdown in Shanghai. Now you might ask, why is China being a part of the equation? Because our stocks come from Japan, but some of the components that are being made is actually from China, and they have to be sent to Japan, right? And if one or two pieces of these shortages happening, then the car can't be built, and we can't have any cars. So because of this, I think and there's a huge backlog of order bookings, I think, experienced by all the distributors in town. I think because of that, I think the government may relent and extend the SST exemption until the end of the year. That's my view anyway. So
yeah, we will, I think, wait for anxiously for the decision, which could be announced anytime this week, or as we get closer to the end of the month. Yep. Dato', in your view, if the sales tax exemption is not extended, are you expecting a sharp drop-off in demand in the second half of this year?
Well, there will be a knee-jerk reaction, obviously, if there's this SST exemption is not extended. But after maybe a couple of months, things will normalize a little bit. Because at the end of the day, like I would like to say that every year, our TIV volume is between 550 to 600,000. We can't go higher, we can't go lower because of the replacement of old vehicles and new graduates coming on board, needing new cars. So that would be the situation going forward if the SST exemption is not being extended to end of the year.
Yeah. Are you already seeing some trend of booking slowing down in June already?
Well, for Burma, I can't say for the other auto players. What we did was for those who booked before 31st May, we will still honor. We still honor. However, come June, we can still see a lot of stragglers of bookings coming in as well. So it's gone back to that so-called almost 95% of pre-pandemic level. We used to get bookings of maybe 30, 40 a day before the pandemic, and then on weekends we get about 90 to 100. So it's happening now as we speak. Not like the one just before May when in 1 week we got like 1,500 bookings, in just 1 week, which we never experienced that type of thing. Only 1 month we'll get that type of booking, but in 1 week we got that type of booking. So, but because of the low inventory that we have, so I will foresee quite a number of months before we can, satisfy the demand.
Yeah. Maybe I'll just direct this question to Mr. Lau. Are you seeing caution, from the OEMs in terms of their expected, procurement in the second half this year, if the exemptions are not extended?
Well, I think the issue with our most of the OEMs in Malaysia, and I can't speak for every one of them, but this is where I'm seeing it. There is a huge pent-up demand that's yet to be fulfilled. Right? I think with or without the SST extension, I believe the order will still be there, but whether it's going to taper off after the SST is lifted will have to be seen. And of course, it will have to face with many other issues as well, stemming from what Ben has said, supply chain situation and the rest of it. But I believe the order bank is easily 5, 6, 7 months. So, and I think the effect of the pandemic over the last 2 years has given the impetus to people to own cars, right? So instead of traveling on public transportation, a lot of these mass market vehicles like the Protons and the Produers, they're having a huge backlog. And I think this backlog will continue on towards the end of the year easy, right? We're talking about 6 months of backlog here. So okay. I see that happening.
I guess with or without SST exemption, it does seem that current, in terms of your visibility, it does seem to suggest a very strong second half still.
Yes.
Yeah. I think there was also a question that came in, like you mentioned, Mr. Lau, there's easily 5, 6, 7 months of order backlog. How many cars does this translate to? Because looking at annual TIV of 600K, it's easily 300,000, I would assume, right?
Yeah, I think the number that's projected for the year is 600,000. And that puts a sharp pen up towards the second half of this year. And I believe the numbers will hit 600, provided all the other constraints are being addressed. For example, the supply chain situation, as what Dr. Francis mentioned, some of the semiconductors are affecting the industry pretty strongly, and some of the components coming from regional sources are actually creating supply constraints. And coupled with the fact that inconsistent deliveries from the freight disruption, and the situation doesn't allow for a proper planning for the OEM, coupled with the fact that local conditions like labor shortages and of the sort actually adds a lot more complexity to fulfill the rest of the numbers. But I can say the demand is there. Is fulfilling the demand will be the main question going
Yeah.
towards the end of the year.
Dr. Francis, do you concur with this assessment that there's around 6 months of order backlog that the industry is still struggling to deliver at this point?
Yeah, I would think so. Around at least minimum of 5-6 months. It's not going to be become better anytime soon. I agree with Mr. Lau on that. And don't forget, from their point of view, if certain parts don't come from certain areas, they're also affected. See, they cannot produce. You see, so he's right. It could be at least for minimum of 5-6 months down the road to clear the backlog of orders that we have.
Yeah. I think the next question I would pose to Derek, with the primary market struggling to meet demand, are you seeing a stronger, demand from the used car market? And can you also comment on how the used car market has performed since the start of the pandemic?
Hi, thank you, Dato and Mr. Lau, for sharing the situation we're happenings right now. So on this situation, right? So everywhere else in the world, the COVID-19 pandemic that ravaged economics and businesses worldwide also heavily impacted the automotive industry in Malaysia, right? So the period of uncertainty and crisis brought about by the pandemic elevated the secondary car market to the new heights. Okay, factors that contributed to the boom of the industry include fear of contracting the COVID-19 virus in public transport spaces, rise in internet and online car bidding platforms, and the shutdowns of assembly plants and sales. So I fully agree with Mr. Lau's statement, where the situation currently doesn't allow us to plan for anything, right? So on all kind of this situation, I would say it will somehow benefited the used car industry. So, but for the long run, I hopefully new car will get in more supply in order to turn into the supply to used car market. That is very important, right? So if new car supply is not back to a normal situation, right? So it will then consuming the used car market, and it will have comes to the end of the life cycle. Yeah, this is my point of view.
Yeah, thank you, Derek, for your views. I think you hit the nail on the head of that. Sometimes we view the used car market to be a competitor to the primary car market, but it's actually a strong complement, right, between these two. I think maybe you can elaborate a bit further on this dynamic between the two markets. I think you mentioned that a strong second-hand market actually stimulate demand for new cars as owners are able to cash out and upgrade, but also new car transactions also stimulate supply, right? So that more cars are out there for those looking or hunting for used cars.
Okay, so like what I mentioned just now, so used car market is relying heavily on new car supply. So used car buyer is definitely different with a new car buyer. So if they have because of currently we have a very heavily impacted from this increasing in cost of living, right? So due to this reason, so people tend to purchase a lower price used car vehicle rather than purchasing a high price new car, and they don't have a handover date to them. Yeah, so eventually it will bring more business to used car, right? So, and I would say this is not long lasting. Yeah, hopefully, new car can bring in more models, and the supply can, not only supply, because the reason why is like the lockdown in China, and then a war between Russia and Ukraine, right? And yeah, the US market is not very good at this moment. Yeah, hopefully all the bad situation will pass as soon as possible. Then we can get all the supply. So which is we can cater all the backlog.
Yeah, I think there's also a bit of I think whereas we are quite certain that the primary market has a certain size of about 600,000 units per annum. There's very little known about the size of the used car market because I think the information is not readily available. What is Baituka's estimation of the annual transaction volume at the used car market?
Okay, according to the monthly transaction of car ownership, right? So the information that we have last year, right, is like close to 30,000 per month. So that is inclusive of these other types of vehicle and motorcycle. So I would say I would see the car transaction will be close to like 400 to 500,000 in a year.
Okay. Dr. Francis, is it an accurate reflection? Do you think?
Yeah, I think Derek mentioned about 400,000 to 5,000. I think that would be this is also based on my estimate, that used car market. Of course, like you said, there's no
Official
official data out there. Maybe the president of the second-hand used car market will shed some light and put some numbers out, like what MA. But now I think MA also, most of the players in the auto industry also have not supplied any numbers since January, February, and March until now this year to be officially known what's the TIV volume other than just a block number a month. So I think we start doing that, at least people have a clear idea of what's the volume and what's the outlook for the auto industry going forward.
Yeah, Dato, we realized that over the years the transparency on the especially on the models, right, has kind of dropped off, and we are no longer seeing that information. I guess a lot of OEMs are looking at it that it's quite sensitive, like if they were to be so transparent. Yeah. But I guess let's go back to the issue on the disruptions, because I think with demand still very strong, like what Mr. Lau is saying, notwithstanding the whether the sales tax is extended. What are the measures that are taken by automotive players to ease the disruptions? And with regard to the chip shortage situation, when can their supply catch up with demand?
This thing is out of our hands, as you know. We are very reliant on our principal to send the goods to us, and of course, like I mentioned earlier, it was exacerbated by this increase in logistic costs as well. So I just found out a couple of days ago that in order for the cars to come direct to Malaysia, they send it via Philippines. I was wondering why through Philippines. It's maybe to lower down their logistic costs, you see, because to pick up more goods from Philippines before it comes to Malaysia. So, but then it's no good to us because it doesn't come direct. We want the car now, not 2 weeks or 3 weeks down the road, so we can clear and then we can book the sales this month, you see. So, going forward, like I said, it's out of our hands. We are working very closely with our principal to send those products to us as soon as possible. And there's a few shortages here and there on our CKD products. We are trying to get them to air flown into Malaysia. These are small little items. Any small little items, the car cannot come up from the plant already, from our plant in Innercom. So we are doing our level best. Of course, a lot of customers out there screaming why they booked 3-4 months ago, they still can't get their car. But it's not just experienced by us, but it's the whole auto industry, you see. So and like I said, we cannot plan forward as well because the chip shortage or logistic issues is not our doing. So we have to rely on the best case scenario to get it moving faster. I think I read in the paper somewhere that China is trying to move their logistic division faster, putting a lot of policies, easing a lot of congestion, so that hopefully that will also impact us a little bit and ease this so-called movement of parts from China to Japan, and hence inventory back to us here.
Yeah. I guess China is still the factory of the world at this point in time.
Yes. Yeah, whether you like it or not, yes, they are.
Automotive supply chain is highly reliant on the goods that are coming out of the country. Mr. Lau, maybe you can chip in on your views on the current semiconductor shortage.
Yeah, okay. I'll try to project what will happen. Currently, as rightly mentioned, the semiconductors issue is a global issue, and it's also affecting the Malaysian automotive sector. But I'm seeing a little bit more recovery in certain models in the local fraternity. But of course, there are certain models where constraints from the principal is making it difficult to project a volume projection. However, I think the semiconductor issue will probably linger with us until at least towards next year. The impact will then ease off. From that perspective, I think our local Malaysian OEM has the flexibility to shift models in their assembly operation, where a certain model has some chip constraint. They could switch over to another model and take up the build volume that is been catered for the assembly plant. So from that angle, the volume may be affected for the TIV in Malaysia, but probably not as per the original model mix. I see there will be a crossover of certain models that will become available and some models which has a chip constraint will be put at the back burner for assembly at a later point. So going forward, perhaps the model that you're seeking to purchase may not be so easily available, but the models that is available, then it makes the volume going forward. So looking at it, the backlog, probably you will see customers perhaps switching model, right? But as the overall view, I think the volume probably will be mainly constrained by the local environmental situation, where our labor content in Malaysia is currently at a critical level. So it encompasses the entire ecosystem of the manufacturing environment. So as and when those are then overcome, perhaps we will see a little bit more stability in the third quarter, towards the end of the quarter, from the supply-based perspective.
Okay.
Right. So as we speak, yes, this morning I read a note in South Korea, there's a major strike. All right. So enabling a supply chain disruption in the entire Korean peninsula. So it looks like some of this unforecasted situation may trickle down to our operations here in Malaysia. So that would be my kind of view on this shortage for now.
Yeah, Mr. Lau, I think you highlighted a key constraint for the domestic auto part players, which is the labor situation. I think what are the other impediments that you're seeing in terms of delaying the industry's return to the optimum capacity?
I think the one that everybody knows about is supply chain, availability of parts, availability of material coming on schedule, on time. Because in the OEM environment, we talk about JIT, so you need to be on time. But I think the concept has entirely changed now. The concept is, yes, I still want a JIT delivery from you, but I want a just-in-case inventory behind the scene. So building up the inventory behind the scene is critical to enable the OEMs to not see the fluctuation in the supply. But this is entirely a very huge challenge because getting the material in consistently on a schedule basis and at the right cost is very, very challenging, because it will, whatever we say, it will entail on the cost of manufacturing that will creep up, and eventually will then creep up to the OEM level. So the main impediment, other than the foreign worker, is the availability of the raw material, critical semiconductor, critical parts, not only semiconductors, because there is a supply constraint not only to the automotive, but also components that make up the CKD that comes to Malaysia. So that's a huge complexity in terms of constraint matters that we need to look at and address going forward.
Okay. Dr. Francis, are you seeing more just in case rather than JIT as in the past?
Well, I mean, we always try to have the just in time, so that we don't have high inventory holding, But then, like I said, we'll take whatever comes, We can't be choosing here and there, Whatever comes, we just put onto the line and, just hope that the others come in as well. So, but of course, that would be the ideal situation just in time. But I don't, under the current scenario, I don't think that's possible.
Okay. Mr. Lau, I think just in case requires more inventory holding, which also translates to higher costs. And I think looking at your first quarter results, I think the margins have somewhat been affected because of this cost pressure. The industry works on a very transparent pricing mechanism with the OEMs, and the higher costs are usually eventually passed through as per usual practice. Do you see this being done over the coming quarters, and the OEMs more receptive to the price increases given the current shortages or constraints?
Yeah, okay. In the OEM business, it's relatively, as you mentioned, it's quite transparent in terms of the costing of components and systems delivered. Because of the high volume, so there is a level of transparency in managing the cost together. So obviously, the cost structure in the manufacturing environment has changed somewhat to an extent where it makes it inevitable that you need to pass on some of these costs. For example, the raw material escalated like 30, 40, 50%. The steel cost has gone up like crazy last year and the year before. And the resin cost is also on an uptrend. In fact, has gone up tremendously as well. Chemical related to petrochemical components is, currently the oil price is like one of the highest. So there is a lagging effect on the raw material that it will be coming. And this is on top of whatever that has already increased in the past year and a half. So all this translates to a cost of manufacturing that is transparent to our OE customers. And there is an obligation to both parties that in order to continue being in supply mode, there has to be some consideration with regard to some of these cost increases. And even as we speak, May 1st, the salary minimum wage has crept up from 1,002 to 1,005.
Yeah.
We have about 4,000 people working in the company. So you can imagine the kind of cost increases. So we are in the process of discussing with the OE customers. And I think the OE customers are receptive as long as you are very clear that the situation is unavoidable based on the local condition and material coming in. They are open for negotiation and discussion. And I think this is the ongoing business model of an OE relationship with the supply base. And I must say that it is healthily moving forward. Of course, there are some challenges, but as in any negotiation, it is a negotiation for a win-win for both parties.
Yeah, I think the OEM and the auto parts sectors are essentially business partners, right? You cannot just take advantage of a short-term situation and push up everything to the OEM side. Yeah. And I think in the past also, if the auto parts manufacturers actually save on costs, those savings are also passed through, right? I think it works both ways.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Dr. Francis, would you have anything to add on this topic?
Yes, I mean, we would like to work with our vendors because they are very important in terms of getting our tax rebates from the government. So really, we have to work with them, to ensure that there's no disruption to the supply chain. So yes, I mean, I think some vendors will also look at yen exposure as well. If yen come down, they have to rebate through Mazda Malaysia some money back as well. But if yen goes up, it's the other way around as well. So we work together and work very closely together to ensure that there's a smooth flow of supply from our vendors.
Yeah, Dr. Francis, you brought up a very important, factor that also drives profitability of the OEMs, which is the exchange rate. I think Burmase is quite fortunate that your supply from Japan actually denominated in yen, right? But for a lot of other manufacturers, or even your other marks like Kia and also Peugeot, they are denominated in USD. So I guess how much does foreign exchange play a factor?
Well, let me clarify. For yen exposure for Mazda business is mainly in CPU form from Japan and from Thailand that we import our cars. But local CKD we buy in ringgit. So we are not affected by the CKD products that we turn out. But of course, the yen exposure is at our joint associate company called Mazda Malaysia. They will enjoy the current low yen rate now. For Kia, yeah, you're right. We are affected by the US dollar because it's imported using US dollar. Currently, the only one that we're importing now is Carnival. But there's enough margin there. We will have to reduce our margin accordingly. But going forward, when we do the CKD for Carnival, it'll be in ringgit as well, so we are not impacted. But for Peugeot, we are still building ringgit from Stellantis Group, from their Gurun plant in ringgit. It's the CKD products. But for the CBU, which we are going to import soon, which is a land track, which is a pickup truck from China, and that's built to us in US dollar. We're happy that yen is not impacted so much. But US dollar, we can't say much about our Kia and our Peugeot product. Luckily, it's only small volumes, for the Peugeot and the Kia. Most of the products in CKD form are in ringgit. So in a way, we are cushioned to some certain extent.
Okay, thanks for your clarification. Yeah, I think let's take a break from the primary car market and move to the used car market for a while. My2Car, like other online platforms, Derek, are transforming the marketplace, right? In terms of increasing the transparency and the efficiency of transactions. Can you explain a bit more about My2Car's vision and business model, and why should people use My2Car for their second-hand car transactions?
Okay. Well, on the buying and selling process of the used vehicle, right? So according to most of the experience for all the seller or even buyer, I would say is not a very happy journey. So our vision is actually to transform and bring the buying and selling process into online, right? So this will create more transparent and seamless process in order to transact a used vehicle. So for example, in terms of maximize the value of the used vehicle, we are having a bidding platform where which is cater for the car seller, right? So right after our inspection on the physical vehicle, so we will tend to put into the bidding platform, right? And then all the used car dealer will actually bid for the car. So this will actually improve the value of the vehicle, and we will have a very transparent inspection report, where used car this will benefit all the used car dealer. They don't have to inspect physically on all the car, right? Then next will be to have the supply nationwide. So meaning to say some of the model that not suitable for Klang Valley, but then doesn't mean that it's not suitable for other region like East Coast or maybe East Malaysia. So the bidding platform will provide a supply to all the dealers in nationwide.
Okay.
So yeah. So on buyer side, so we have actually transformed the buying process online. So meaning to say we have a 360 viewing on the car vehicle through online. So meaning to say you can just surf to our website and then choose which model that they prefer. Then they can go externally and internally for 360, and then with 160 point check, then they will understand more on details of the vehicle. Then they can straight away make a booking and pay deposit and apply financing online.
Okay. There's a question submitted by the audience. Do you see any trends in terms of pricing of used cars given the shortage in the primary market? Is it on the rise, especially for popular models? Are you seeing that trend?
Well, I by looking at the price, I would say the car price is not depreciate like 2 years ago. So meaning to say previously the car price will drop like 10 to 15% year by year, right? So now I would say the price, if you talk about the primary car, right? So it will tend to reduce like probably 5%, okay? And then for all the local made model, so the price is not decreased after 1 year. So when we are talking about we don't have depreciation, means in a way that the car price is increasing.
Okay.
This is from our data, what we can see.
I think visually I surf for car prices, and I can see that you're right, that value seems to be holding up. Second-hand value holding up better in current conditions. I'm sure Dr. Francis also concurs, right?
Yeah, I mean, the not enough stock around going around, so more demand than supply. So what do you expect?
Yeah, there is also a question on a lot of car marks also doing their own second-hand car division. I think Bermas has done so with the Mazda brand. So has this also translated into better second-hand value for your cars, and will you continue to do so for your new marks going forward?
Yeah, definitely so. Why? Because as you know, Bermas is known for their 5+5. Means when you buy our car, it comes with 5-year free service maintenance program and 5 years warranty on the car. So people who buy our car have really got a peace of mind for the next 5 years. They don't have to worry about the car. Spare parts will be abundant, and obviously that will translate into better resale value for the car because it's been well looked after, right? So yes, we started our Unseen program, which is our used car division. But these are mainly to complement what is already in the market. These are our so-called demo model or those used by our managers. After 6 months, 8 months, we'll put it onto our Unseen program. So there is stability in terms of car pricing for all our cars. So that would, of course, translate to better resale value when people say, "Hey, why is Bermas Unseen selling at this price? Why you are offering me this price?" So yes, that will be a stabilizer for our resale value for our cars. And of course, now with more demand than supply, that will also moving closer to our price, in terms of the pricing formula. So yes, you're right. That will also be a very good resale value for all our cars going forward.
Okay. I guess let's move on to, I think, the question on what will be the key factors that will determine demand in 2023. I think in the short term, from what we can see, there's really strong demand for the rest of the year. But, there's still a lot of challenges, like what Ben mentioned. Dato', what would be the key factors that will drive the industry volume for 2023?
Well, like I said, the cash in people's hands, whether there's any big increase in the expenditure that they're going to come up with because the inflation is running high. So these are some of the factors that may affect whether they want to purchase a new car or not, or they might go for a second-hand car. But as far as we are concerned, Burma is concerned, our volume is not that big. I mean, we're talking about Mazda, so our volume is about 1,000 odd units a month, that type of thing, And ours is catered towards more of the middle to higher income earners, So in a way, we are not that affected that much compared to those mass market producer, below 100,000 ringgit. Those are the ones will be affected most if the economy turns the other way. So like I said, we are not coming from a big base. So we hope that even if the downturn in 2023, it will not be severe as far as Burma's group is concerned.
Okay. Sakina, we did launch a poll at the end of Ben's presentation on this topic. Can you share the results of the poll, and let's see what the audience thinks about, what will be the key challenge for 2023?
Sure. Sharing the results now.
Yeah.
Are you able to see the results?
Okay. It seems that
Supply chain.
the elevated cost of living that Dato mentioned could be a key dampener. It came in second. I think seems that the audience are not very convinced that the supply chain situation will improve next year. So I think we could have another program to revisit this poll next year if if the opportunity arises. But thanks audience for your input. I think all these are relevant in terms of the impact, and I think on the first on prohibitive car prices, right? While the consumers face constraint in terms of their disposable income, the industry is also facing high input costs, higher costs in general, right? So the costs have to be eventually passed through. And at the same time, there's also talk that of the GST reimplementation, and also the new excise duty rules, that I think the industry has been talking about, which could also add up to 10% to the pricing. What are your thoughts on the timeliness of this GST reimplementation and also the new excise duty rules now? Is it a right time to be doing this, given that the industry is still struggling to keep up with demand and also other challenges?
Well, I mean, about the GST increase, I think it's good for the country. I actually are all for GST because you spend, you pay lah. That's the basic guideline for this GST implementation. But of course, one of the major issues that in the last implementation was the refund process. If you don't refund back quickly to the people who actually paid for it, then they have to carry the cost, and the cost has to be passed on to somebody. So if they can iron out some of the issues that was raised in the last GST implementation, I think going forward, I think it will be good for the country. This is my own belief. So it's more like an open tax system where everybody pays for what they spend. So that's good. And so far as cost increase, even a couple of thousand, you amortize over 5 years or 9 years to some extent. Certain car models can have 9 years. I don't think that's a big impact, on terms of the whether the consumer will buy the product or not. Now, as far as the excise tax is concerned, I think maybe the government will have to relook at it with the high inflationary rate that is coming online. They might think twice and might postpone it again. That's my opinion. I think as it is, the auto industry is still not coming out of the woods yet, as I mentioned earlier on. So I think it would be good for them to postpone this excise tax, so-called new tax implementation from 1st of January next year. That's my view.
Yeah. Mr. Lau, any thoughts on the GST impact and also SST impact? I mean the excise duty revision impact on the auto parts players, if you can.
Well, I think I share almost exactly what Dr. Francis mentioned. GST is a consumption tax, so you consume, you pay. But the thing is that whether it is a political direction or a economical or commercial decision will have to be regulated to the people who are in power for this. Nevertheless, I think GST is a fair taxation methodology adopted for well over 100 countries. So it's a well-proven tax regime. And I think going forward, it's probably maybe coming instead of 6%, maybe coming at a low number so that the impact can be a little bit less impactful and a little bit more palatable. Perhaps instead of 6, maybe coming in at 3 or 2, depending on how it looks like. Because the slow introduction to the GST regime will eventually get people to accustom to the process of paying a little bit more for the goods that you consume. And that is kind of in line with my personal opinion. As far as the excise duty recalculation methodology is concerned, I think it should be postponed. I mean, it's just that the pandemic and the situational issues have not come to a real steady state yet for the automotive industry. And putting a so-called a negative damper from 1st January 2023, you are actually putting a little bit of a hurdle for a thorough recovery for the automotive ecosystem. So I think from the MAA's perspective, lobbying the government to move it a little bit further down the line, perhaps is the right move. And I think that will ensure a good recovery from 2022 and moving on with the momentum into 2023. I believe that should be the right decision. So I do hope that is going to be that direction.
Yeah, I think it goes a long way to keep prices of affordable next year, right? I mean, there's a lot of cost pressures that are faced by auto parts and also OEMs. There's a question from the audience, I think to both Dato and also Mr. Lau. What strategies that you can employ to keep car costs down? Dato Francis, maybe we can have you commenting on this.
Well, I mean, FOB prices, there's nothing much we can do. These are all by the principles. What we can do is to keep our overheads low. I mean, as far as we are concerned, Burma's group, we have additional 2 more franchises. So we have not hired like senior people to handle those newer brands. We use the second echelon of leaders that we have. It's time for them to promote, step up, and also, of course, we've got to give some to those head of departments that's handling all 3 brands now, So this is better than having a full-blown total management, a new management team for each individual new franchises. So in a way, our cost is spread over 3 brands rather than just 1 brand. So that also will reduce our overhead, and hence, of course, that will not have too much of a pressure for us to increase price, so to speak, because we want to keep our overheads low going forward. We are very nimble, so to speak. We are very adjustable, and we don't pay huge salaries to all our people, but we give big bonuses if the profits comes in. That's a better way to ensure that the cost pressure is not there. Our own overhead pressure is not there. So going forward, we are in a much better position compared, like what you mentioned earlier, about those with factory costs, high overheads, running. Whether you don't sell anything, you still got costs involved on a monthly basis. But for us, it's more like a variable cost type of thing, rather than a fixed overhead. So yes, in a way, we are much insulated from all this price pressure.
Yeah, Mr. Lau, any perspectives on your end on how the auto parts manufacturer can be more efficient and hence, be more cost competitive?
I think APM Group, the manufacturing concern, bear the brunt of looking for cost improvement. And I think we have been engaging ourselves with a lot of automation, putting through a lot of capex investment in our facilities, especially in Malaysia, where we automate wherever we can. Dependency on manual worker, which is hard to come by now. So, and also we look at our regional presence, because APM is also present in the ASEAN context, and we look at regionally sourcing for our own material from the ASEAN region. And in fact, also probably engage some of the facilities that we have built over the years in Indonesia or in Vietnam, where we supplement supply from our own facilities to mitigate the rising costs in Malaysia. So this is some of the things that we have to do and we are doing to mitigate the cost increases that it will eventually pass on to our OEM customers. Because we also have a responsibility within our operation to reduce cost in a way that we should and remain competitive in the environment. Because now the global market, the global sourcing of parts is no longer confined to Malaysia. You are being benchmarked with supply from China, You are being benchmarked with suppliers from India. So you have to remain extremely competitive, and it is in our activity, or shall I say our core responsibility, to look at avenues on how we can actually mitigate some of these costs by moving facilities outside Malaysia where we can have enjoy low cost of manufacturing, and supplementing what we require in Malaysia, and automate wherever possible. I think that's the key thing that we have to do. And rolling into the industry 4.0 practices, where we have a higher efficiency of tracking and all that kind of stuff in a highly automated factory.
Yeah. I think APM has a unique advantage in the sense that you have a regional footprint, and also the financial capacity to undertake the automation that's required to step up in terms of efficiency. But the industry is pretty fragmented, right? I think there's only a few tier 1 and a lot of tier 2, tier 3, and some of these lower tier manufacturers have been severely affected by the pandemic. And do you see them being able to adjust to the new realities, or are we likely see consolidation in this sector?
Okay, my view in this is that probably it will happen. In fact, some of these, shall I say, tier 2, tier 3, operational or manufacturing concern have actually decided not to continue, because it just takes too much financial and human resources to reactivate to pre-pandemic levels. So I foresee two things may happen. One, like you said, a consolidation of such a component manufacturing, and another option is probably some of the OEMs will bring in additional suppliers from overseas to fill in the gaps. Right? For example, we are seeing 1 or 2 suppliers coming from China, brought in by our local OEM customer. Basically, it's not because of wanting more competition, it's because they need to fill a gap of some of the component makers that is not really able to make it. So I see two things happening. One, an evolution of, shall I say, some consolidation in certain organizations, in certain commodities within the operation, and perhaps starting to look outside Malaysia as a regional source. And as you know, Malaysia in ASEAN context, you have these tax advantages if you bring components within the ASEAN context, where you have the CPT, the Artigas, and all that. So it makes sense now. Perhaps not only manufacturing in Malaysia is the key, but sourcing from different locations within ASEAN may be the way to go to mitigate some of these component shortages and consolidate the entire ecosystem of part making.
Yeah, okay.
This is what I see going forward.
Yeah. Thanks, Mr. Lau. I think another concern is about financing environment and rising interest rates. There is a question that I think everyone can answer. I think from Dato Francis, are you seeing any slowdown in demand following the first OPR hike, the unexpected OPR hike, and do you foresee demand to be dampened by the expected further increases for the remainder of the year?
Well, I mean, as far as Burma is concerned, we are not much impacted. I mean, before the pandemic, 20% of our buyers use cash to buy.
Okay.
So ours are more on the middle, the high income earner that's buying our cars. So in terms of the financing for our cars, I think the impact is minimal versus those below 100,000. Especially the middle to lower income, that will be impacted the most if there's a aggressive OPR hikes in the next 1 to 2 years. As far as we are concerned, I don't see any issue in terms of ours, the OPR hikes affecting our group of cars. Yeah.
I see. Okay. Derek, there's a question for you on the financing conditions for used car markets. And the question goes like this: many banks traditionally finance this segment have reduced exposure, but with My2Car or Kasam in the marketplace suggests that the market is getting more transparent. Has this translated to better pricing for used cars, LTVs, and also access to financing? Would you be able to answer? I think part of it was answered earlier, but I think this audience requires a more complete view.
Yeah, well, okay. So in terms of financing, so I would say auto financing is the major product, one of the major product from the bank. So even they are trying to tighten up for all those application, but then I will say they are still very focusing on this product, right? So in terms of from our point of view, so we will need to have our own product to provide financing to all the buyers. So that is the reason why we having our own financing product, which is Genie Financing Services. Okay, so on this product, we are able to provide financing to all those to run their own business without any documentation to apply for the loan. For example, a hawker who actually getting 10,000 income in a month, but they are unable to get any loan from the bank. Okay, right? So from our GFS, we are able to provide the financing for them. Okay, so next will be the transparency on the car price and LTV, right? So we are trying to set our benchmark on all the used vehicle. So because previously we don't have any benchmarking in the price, and then now I would say some of the bank, they are actually following our guideline, and we are coming up with our own pricing tool, and we have in touch with 2 banks where they were starting to subscribe for our product in terms of providing financing to all the buyers. Yeah, so I would say on this piece, so benchmarking is very important. So we will try to set a benchmark and get them to follow. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I think on our end, because we also cover the banks, I think our view is that the additional interest rate hikes that's expected this year is not likely to impact the loan approval rates or the levels going forward. And this is because we expect the banks to continue to lend if the applicants' credit profiles and income levels continue to meet the lender's criteria. Just like how the car is the second largest purchase for a household after our homes, auto loans are the second largest segment for the consumer lending in the financial system. So industries will be cautious of, staying away from this segment, because if they do, then it's very hard to get back into the market. So this is our perspective on this, on how the OPR is going to translate into approvals. Okay, I think let's see whether I have other questions. Dr. Francis, there's a question on improve pre-tax profits in your latest quarter due to improved margins of the sales mix of CKD vehicles. And the audience just wanted to have a better clarity on how that was able to offset the rising input costs situation. Yeah.
Well, you see, normally our sales mix is around 70-30. I'm talking about Mazda, I'm not talking about Kia and Future, because those are still very from a very low base, small volume. We used to have 30% CBU cars from Japan and from Thailand, and 70% CKD. But in the last few months, it was almost like 85 to 90%. And 1 month was 90%, because there's shortages of parts from Japan. So we hardly got any CBU cars from Japan. So we try our level best to push through the CKD products to clear, and then that's how we got almost like 85-90% in especially the last 2 months of our latest financial year. Hence, as you know, CKD products will give us better margin than CBU. CBU, we are always subject to price increase or logistic cost issues, and things like that. So yes, it's mainly because of that, and of course a little bit of yen, depreciation also helps in the certain number of small units of CBU cars that we're able to garner from Mazda Japan. So that's mainly the reason why our margin improved, especially in the last quarter.
Okay, thanks for that. The next topic I would like to delve into is a very hot topic, which is sustainability or ESG. Dr. Francis, due to sustainability commitments, global automakers are actually aggressively transitioning into electric vehicles. What direction is Burma taking when it comes to low carbon mobility?
Well, this is a very hot topic, ESG compliant. As far as we are concerned, Mazda over the last 6-7 years, they have gone on to this Sky Active technology, which will improve the fuel efficiency going forward. Because last time the internal combustion engine, they only can garner about 50% from the engine, but now they have moved up to almost 70 to 80%. So in a way, that will reduce the carbon footprint as far as Mazda cars is concerned. But going forward, of course, we are also moving into the EV sector. Although it took a bit of time, because we want to make sure that whatever we launch on the EV segment, we want to make sure the customers are well looked after. That's our mainstay, in terms of what when you buy a car from Burma, we have a peace of mind, at least for the next 5-6 years when you own an EV car. So we are now ready. We are putting a team since January of this year to study the impact and also what needs to be done. So we have time with some preferred chargers, to set up a charging station. So we're all ready to roll. And hence, that's why we are bringing some Kia EV6, and we're going to launch the MX-30 EV from Mazda Japan. And of course, the later on in the year, in the last quarter of this calendar year, we are bringing the E2008 from Peugeot. So yes, we have a few product lineup. In fact, our EV6 is all sold. Although we wanted a few hundred units, they only give us 5 units. So it's all sold. But the president of Kia was here last month. He was very happy with what he saw in Malaysia. So he's committed to switching some of the volumes from other markets to the Malaysian market. And some of the senior officials in Korea are not very happy with that. But but he wants to make sure that we want to make Malaysia an auto hub for the ASEAN market. So this is a very good opportunity for Malaysia to entice them to invest more and more for the ASEAN market. Because as you know, most of the Japanese players are already in the region, in other parts of the country, countries other than Malaysia. So actually, Korean manufacturers are not represented in Malaysia at all. So we are trying to convince the government to work with them and see how we can increase their volume for the ASEAN market. Starting with Kia products.
Yeah. This is a topic that I'll explore further down the road. But I think just going back on, the current incentives for EVs currently in Malaysia, do you view that it is sufficient, and what more needs to be done to increase the traction for demand, as well as to entice the manufacturer to launch and or maybe assemble those cars in Malaysia?
Well, I think the government's hands are tied in terms of giving subsidy to those who buy. Because to be fair, EV cars are still very expensive. Very expensive, and I think about 40% of the cost of the car comes from the battery. And we were thinking of battery prices coming down over the years as they become more efficient, but it's going the other way around, with the high cost of raw material costs and so on and so forth. So and so far as the EV is concerned, the government incentive, I think they should have a longer term perspective rather than just 3 or 4 years. As we CBU exemption until end of 2023, and then CKD, end of 2025. So I think it's too short to do any CKD project. I think Mr. Lau would agree with me. At least it's a 5 to 8 year program. It's not just like 2 years after that. What's going to happen after that? His tooling cannot be amortized over just 2 years. It can't be more than that. Otherwise, the cost is very expensive.
Yeah.
So I believe that the government should have a more comprehensive policies to entice EV makers to make Malaysia an automotive hub. But currently, as it stands, the policy I don't think is viable personally. So it's just for many distributors to take advantage of this 2-year CBU and bring it in as many as they can if it's available to them and benefit from it. And after that, forget about CKD program. That's my view anyway.
Okay. Mr. Lau, any additional thoughts?
This is definitely a hot topic. And I truly concur. I mean, just by announcing that it's a duty exemption of CBUs and CKDs doesn't make the direction of EV vehicles in Malaysia right. Because I think it takes a lot more than just having an incentive on tax. If you want to build an ecosystem for battery-related vehicles, you need to talk about where is the battery going to come from? Do you have a reliable battery configurator? Do you have the infrastructure to support EV charging in the Malaysian environment? Do you work with Tenaga? Do you work with petrol station? Do you work with all that? And on top of that, do we have the necessary mindset, a key set, or shall I say skill set to do all this and support the technology as we move along? Because as rightly pointed out, the battery is a key component. All right. If you do not have a battery sustainable support infrastructure, you will lose out, because you will lose out to the likes of Thailand and Indonesia. They will hold the big bucks of your key component, and you will never be competitive going forward in the long term. So as long as the structural management of technology on EV evolution is not being managed, I think it's a very short-term view for EV adoption in Malaysia, because at this moment the EV adoption is purely on the luxury, I would say mid to luxury model. But if you truly want to adopt an EV transition, you need to talk about the likes of the Protons and the Produers and all that, because that will give you the mass market switch over from an ICE engine to a battery EV vehicle. And I think if that infrastructure is not set up properly and correctly, it's only going to be a blip in the Malaysian environment, and it's not going to be a long lasting. So we need to be able to benchmark with, for example, what's happening in Thailand and what's happening in Indonesia. They went down to the roots. How do they actually encourage the development of EV in the country? And they already have made a good head start. And Malaysia just, unfortunately, just announced the incentive on duty. Right? So I think a lot more needs to be done here to move along this chart, this area.
Yeah. Thanks for your views, Mr. Lau. I think the other question is, of course, even if the assembly of EVs and the sales take off in a big way in Malaysia, are the local auto parts manufacturers ready to support the domestic production of such parts as required? And over time, I think the types of parts required is also very different, right? So what is traditionally supplied to the ICE cars will also die off. So any views on this?
I think you have rightly pointed out that that's the difference between the EV and ICE engine. Right? The key difference is the powertrain. Instead of an ICE engine, you have a motor. And the whole idea is that it's powered up. Instead of petrol, you have a battery. So the whole configuration of an EV car is basically managing the battery and the motor. All right. The technology is not about motor. The motor has been in as long as we know, it's in the toys and everything else. The motor concept is exactly the same. Battery is the battery, but how do we manage the battery and the system to enable an optimal EV configuration to allow for range, to allow for longevity and durability of a vehicle? So all this plays a huge role in the Malaysian, if we were to adopt the EV technology in a big way, we need to be able to have battery capable suppliers, or shall I say battery configurator suppliers. You need to be able to have a communication and managing of the infrastructure from engineering perspective. You need to be able to develop motorization of a certain level where you can then put it all together. So all this from the part making perspective, some organizations have already started pivoting All right, I put a little bit more to APM. We started to look at that a few years back. All right, so the fact is that the local part making environment ecosystem, I would say some are getting ready, some are not there. But to get to full readiness, it takes a lot of effort and a lot of governmental guidance to make sure that the whole entire ecosystem to support EV can be maintained and can be supported.
Yeah.
Right. So this is my take on part making and manufacturing to support EV transitioning in the next couple of years.
I think it all starts with very strong government policies, right, to address all the concerns that you have here, in terms of the infrastructure, and also what's the long-term, incentives for global automakers to position their assembly plants of EVs here. Yeah. Another question for you, Mr. Lau. Do the OEMs impose sustainability requirements on the auto parts manufacturers like yourselves?
In recent times, you get to see a lot related questions when we are getting visitors from OE global companies. When they do an audit on our processes and the practices in organization, which is pretty standard. More and more, I see ESR type questions being put into the also for the survey questions. So I think in the local context, it's beginning to show, but in a big way, I think it's going to happen very soon, right? So, but from APM perspective, ESR and sustainability to us, it's like, you've been practicing it all along. It's just putting it in the framework. For example, what kind of carbon footprint, you just have to work out the work that we do in regeneration of energy in a different configuration and translate it to some kind of a carbon number. So it has always been done in that way. And solar energy in all our factories, in fact, a few factories of ours. So that kind of generates a sustainable return to the organization as we normally do. But the framework of sustainability then puts it all into a number that is for reporting purposes.
I see.
So it is like putting what has been constantly being done over the years into a framework for reporting. That's our view on sustainability, and OE recognizes this as well. So it's just that they have structured questions in a way that addresses sustainability in that regards.
Yeah.
Right? So
yeah. I have a question for Derek. In the past, we've seen some steep depreciation for hybrid and electric vehicles, right? I think, do you continue to see this trend in terms of aversion towards the hybrid electric vehicles in Malaysia and reflected in the depreciation?
Well, I can't agree more with Dato and Mr. Lau, because the capability on maintenance of the EV is so-called not so matured in Malaysia. So because to bring in EV and to promote EV is very simple, but we will need to have the complete infrastructure and ecosystem. Like, for example, the most important one is the charging station. Right? So if we able to sell a new EV without without enough charging station, that is a burden for the buyer, right? Okay, so in terms of pricing, so I would say consumer is not very confident on how they're going to maintain or to check on the condition of the battery. So like what Dato mentioned just now, the cost of the main cost of the EV coming from the battery is like 30 to 40%, right? So if they buy a used car with no warranty or no proper maintenance from probably the previous owner, right, is a very big headache for them lah. So in terms of my Tukar perspective, we are actually in the midst of discussion with the extended warranty, where we will come up with our own program to provide to the buyer. If they buy a car from us, then we will try to cover the battery. So this is one of the discussion with our partner.
Yeah. I think Dato' Francis, you would be probably looking at the the warranty of the batteries for the EVs that you'll be launching, right?
No, I mean, we'll do a back-to-back with our principal because we have in no position to warranty any batteries personally.
Okay. All right. So I think we're running out of time. I think we'll cap off this session by talking about any silver linings. I think we talk a lot about challenges, but Dato', do you see any silver linings for this sector? What are the opportunities that automakers like yourself can tap on? In the near term.
Well, the only silver lining is that we are launching some new models, so hopefully that will help to boost our sales. And like I said, going forward, we always we're not a big volume player in the marketplace. We are happy with what we have, because if you put in a lot of volume, you put a lot of pressure on the company to ensure that you actually had the volume. And then, of course, with higher volume, you gotta have higher overheads as well. So the silver lining is that we are a niche player in the automotive market. Of course, with 2 additional brands that will help to elevate our status to be a so-called auto conglomerate. And if we can do around 25,000-30,000 a year, I mean, not considered big, not small, but it's just a nice niche, so to speak. So that's where we want to be, going forward. And the silver lining is because that we are a player. We know what we're doing, and we will adjust, whatever we have according to the market needs. So we have a strong team that's able to do that with many years of automotive experience. So I think going forward, we are in a much better position compared to others.
Yeah. Is there any specific requests for the government in order to get more local assembly done in the country? After all, you have two additional brands to take care of now. And what are the challenges that prevent Malaysia from being an export hub for automobiles?
Okay, good that you answered this question. We are trying to entice the Korean automakers to make it bigger in Malaysia, but the impediment currently is the taxes being accorded to a country like Korea versus Japan. Japan import duty is 0. Everything is 0, right? But Korea, it ranges from 5 to 30%. So for a start, they are really far back behind compared to the Japanese automakers. And now Korea, I think they can have a leap forward versus the Japanese by going the EV route. Because Japanese are a bit slow in adopting the EV segment. Whereas Korea are going very big, and then, as you know, I think a lot of people know that Hyundai has already set up a big battery plant in Indonesia. So they only left the Korean players and, of course, some European players. And then European players, we have Stellantis, which is the big top 5 manufacturer in the world. So, and then, of course, Korea, we have Hyundai and Kia, which is also the top 5 manufacturer in the world. So I think when they come to the government and ask for assistance, it must be a level playing field. That's all I'm saying, Give them a level playing field, so then they will be interested. But if not, there's a handicap system. How to play, with a high handicap versus the Japanese players. So they can't, people are not willing to accept a very high price Korean product versus the Japanese products.
Yeah.
So we're not asking for a big, incentive. We're asking for level playing field, and compete on an even level field. So that's where we're coming from, and hopefully together, Kia president, in fact, is coming again next month. Unheard of, for a big automotive president coming to Malaysia 2 times in 3 months. So they are very serious about this market, and I hope that we can present some proposals to the government to consider, so that they can really make it work in Malaysia as an automotive hub, which is what we are trying to do as well, and Burma's Auto Group. and hopefully we can get some good news from the government going forward.
Yeah, hopefully, there's some sort of free trade agreement, that can be done between South Korea and Malaysia when it comes to auto parts or automotives. Mr. Lau, can you also share your views on, what can be done to encourage local assembly and also, promote Malaysia as an export hub?
Okay, I think this is quite a loaded question because there are so many things that have to be considered. I think Dr. Francis has pointed that out. It has to do with a lot of governmental support. I think for a true manufacturer of automotive from Malaysia, you truly need a thorough depth in terms of localization. Right? So the level of localization has many levels. One, as we have experienced in the past or even now, Japanese vehicles are predetermined or pre-designed back in its home country, and Malaysia is basically a follower of the automotive parts. Meaning we work with the principal suppliers. When you work with principal suppliers, the cost of the parts is inevitably added on in terms of the cost structure. So in order to promote Malaysia as a true local hub for automotive vehicles, it has to be regionally competitive. Right? So from the OEM perspective, to enable a country to export vehicles, they look at many options because they are global players. Should we get it out from ASEAN? Should we get it out from Europe, or should we get it out from Japan? It depends on the cost structure of building that particular vehicle in that location, whether the cost merit it to be able to be put into the marketplace regionally as a proper export location. So there are so many things that have to be considered. The Malaysian government probably have to look at localization definition. The way to define a localization could be, you must have R&D content. You must have developmental capable suppliers to develop those components so that you do not have to source from the original maker. You have options of a true local supply base. And in order to do all that, it have to be another governmental push, for an OE to be able to export, you must have a certain level of localization, which is already existing, by the way. If you have an ASEAN content of 40% source of part into the country, you turn it into a regional ASEAN vehicle. But from the part making perspective, in order to make it even more competitive, you need economies of scale. Right? And the Malaysian environment, if you look at it, whether we like it or not, it's only about 600,000 vehicles per year. And coupled with so many variants, right? So economies of scale in that regard is in the automotive world is really not so encouraging. So in order to have that, you need to have a true local, perhaps a true localization activity to enable the capability, the ability, and also to create the necessary components for the OE market to take advantage of. Like for example, in Thailand, they have generic vehicles built and designed in Thailand. Same like in Indonesia, generic vehicles designed and built in Indonesia for an ASEAN market. So a lot of the parts actually are developed in the country with, of course, a guidance from the principal. So if Malaysia were to be part and parcel of an export-driven, true mass market type vehicle production hub like Thailand or Indonesia, then a lot have to do with how the view of localization must take place within the country. So there's a lot of consideration in that regard. So I won't delve a lot more into the cost part of it, but it's basically the concept of you need to have true in-depth localization for parts and components for it to enjoy economies of scale.
Yeah, I'm sure Dato' Francis agrees as well, right?
Yes, wholeheartedly.
Mr. Lau, despite the near-term challenges, what are the opportunities that you see for Malaysian auto parts manufacturers to pursue?
I think that's also a very good question because the evolution of EV is beginning to take place. So I think companies which have the foresight to look at this have to start developing or starting to look at partners who are able to provide some level of opportunity in the context of Malaysia, not only Malaysia, in the region. If you look at the ASEAN population, we now have about 650 million in ASEAN context. And ownership numbers in this region is obviously far lower than some developed countries. So the opportunity for such volumes in the total industry volume in the region is obviously not completely fulfilled. So opportunity for more vehicles to be built in this region is going to be increasing further. You can see the investment from Hyundai putting a major plant in Indonesia to build more Hyundai vehicles for the region. You can see the likes of battery makers, CATL, a global #1 battery maker, already making its footing in Indonesia. And you also see the likes of LG battery being put in Indonesia. All this translates to an evolution into the EV industry, and these are all new opportunities for fund makers in the country as well, and also those in the region. So if I look at it, the Malaysian fund making group have to start embracing the new ways of componentry that is going to come, and to be able to take advantage of that uptick. Not to say that some of the other components is going to fade into the sunset industry, which I must admit some will do. Some will follow the ICE engine concept, which will go into sunset industry. But there are still many components in an EV vehicle that will still be retained. So the opportunity in a 600 million population in ASEAN is going to be there. So things like suspension, things like air conditioning, things like interiors, will continue to form part of the basis of the volumes of the industry. So I think the Malaysian auto parts industry, there is an opportunity to grow. And it just have to be transitioning to the new needs of the new set of vehicles, and to be able to have enough cost of enough economies of scale to take advantage of this. So I think that will be my view. It's more opportunity than some downside.
Okay. Yeah, just a last question for Derek to cap off this session. What's your outlook for the used car market for the rest of the year and also for next year? Derek?
I was mute. Okay, so I would say for the year of 2022, used car was still going on with good sign, and yeah, we hopefully new car supply will resume back to normal as soon as possible, as to consume in just only used car vehicle will end very shortly. Right, so in order to have the supply chain ongoing, so we are relying heavily on new car supply and also the parts supply.
So that would be the constraint, while you still think that there is a good demand for used cars. It's just that new supply is limited until the primary car market gets its act together.
Yes, correct.
Okay. All right, I think we exceeded time already, and I learned a lot from this this panel discussion. I hope the audience also feel the same. Thank you to Dr. Francis, Mr. Lau, and Derek for sharing, your insights on how the industry works, and what are key challenges and opportunities that we can foresee in the near term. Yeah. So with that, I would end the panel session.